I'm already advancing the slides. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar presentation. Today, we are excited to present to you a very special research presentation on veteran employment programming, what is working. We love research-based information, and so we're really excited about what we're having to present to you today with our special guest, Dr. Daniel Perkins from Penn State's Clearinghouse for Military Family Readiness. And also with me today, I'm excited to have my co-host, Ross, from Hire Heroes USA. And we're going to be monitoring in the chat and answering some of the questions and just grilling into Dr. Perkins on your behalf. So thank you so much for joining us. Also, so a couple of things, right? We are going to have a 1-hour presentation at the top of the hour. We know that you all have schedules, but we are going to stay on the line for an additional 30 minutes for anyone that wants to stay for the additional Q&A section. But we'd love to hear the insights that you're learning from today. So feel free to tweet at us or put those things that you're learning on social media, LinkedIn. We'd love to hear what you find valuable from today's session. And you can see our handles here on this slide. Just a little bit about me. I'm Kelly Finnstormer, the Executive Director of the Combined Arms Institute, Navy veteran. And like I said, I have my friend Ross with me today as an Army veteran. So we wanted to make sure we balanced everything out. But we are here to ensure that we're helping veteran service providers come along their learning journey. And so Hire Heroes USA is coming to just help us do a lot of the Q&A and question and answer to dig into some of this data on behalf of all of us. So I'm just, like I said, Ross is the Chief Operating Officer at Hire Heroes USA, West Point graduate. I'm thrilled to have him with me today as my co-host. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Ross, to talk about what we're going to do next.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Kelly, and thanks to the entire team at Combined Arms for the opportunity to join and collaborate with you in today's wonderful event. As you said, I'm an Army veteran, but I do like to play nice throughout the veterans serving community with Navy folks, so it's wonderful to collaborate. And I've been at Hire Heroes USA since 2015. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Kind of talk a little bit about why Hire Heroes USA, why we're excited to partner with the Combined Arms Institute for today's event, really in support of the mission of maximizing the impact of the veteran serving community. We really believe in collaboration across this community to make sure all our veterans, military spouses, and families, that they have that best access to high quality services. And so it's super exciting for us to partner with Kelly today and the entire Combined Arms Institute to really grow our community through this collaborative effort. And we really appreciate Dr. Perkins joining to help share the data of the Veteran Metrics Initiative to grow all of us. As we move to the next slide, we talk about how this effort really aligns with the pillars of the Combined Arms Institute. First, VSO 2.0, what we're talking about is an investment in the professional development of veteran serving organizations. Webinars like today, training workshops, fundraising academies, other certifications and seminars really aimed at professionalizing our industry. That downstream impact is our clients, those veterans, families, and military spouses achieve great return because of that. Their quality of life is improved. The second major pillar is the dedication to constantly measuring the effectiveness of our coordinated service offerings through the space. Through accountability of partnerships, really focused on ensuring the client experience is consistent and improved upon. We use this data across all of the partners in the space to help shape future policy and programs. And kind of the major theme of that is that collaboration, that third pillar. We can't do it alone, and it really is a community in the VSO space to improve those outcomes for the clients. Lastly, just a quick, for those of you who aren't familiar with Hire Heroes USA, we are a veteran serving organization. We support veterans, military service members, and military spouses of any era to help them find successful employment. And we do this through a personalized support system using a one-on-one dedicated specialist who partners with that service member or spouse to take them through career counseling, resume development, networking, and partner them with volunteers and tremendous advocates for mock interviews and a host of other virtual engagement opportunities and hiring events. Last year, we had 11,580 confirmed hires, and over the lifetime of our organization, we've helped over 52,000 veterans and military spouses find successful employment. We're super excited to partner with Combined Arms and the Combined Arms Institute as we continue to figure out how this partnership across the space yields those best quality of life and outcomes for the veterans. I'll pass it back to you, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Ross. Yeah, and we are just thrilled for this opportunity. As you know, Combined Arms, we partner with best-in-class organizations to ensure that veterans and families get connected. And through the Institute, we want to ensure that we empower you with data-driven information so that you can make and provide the best programming for veterans and military families. And so just thrilled to be with you today. But the star of the show today is our Danny Perkins. We're so honored to have you with us. Dr. Perkins is the principal scientist at the Clearinghouse for Military Family Readiness out of Penn State. A little "We Are" cheer for you today, for you, sir. We're just excited. He's been working really hard for the last several years to lead the study for the Veteran Metrics Initiatives. The funding philanthropic community has been studying and analyzing this data. We are just thrilled to be able to put this information in the hands of the providers so that you know how you can make and improve your veteran programming to be the most effective way possible. At the end, we're going to have a survey for your feedback on this information and also a way for you to get engaged if you want to participate in some more analytical working groups going forward. So Dr. Perkins, I'm just going to want to appreciate you and just want to turn it over to you to tell us more about the Veteran Metrics Initiative and this great research that you've been doing. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Kelly, thanks to you and Combined Arms, and thanks to Ross. It's really, I'm actually really excited to have conversations with folks on the ground and to really think about how we utilize this information to help us do our jobs better. I think that's the whole purpose of this. I'll just give a shout out to someone who just shouted out to me. Jim Beamister is talking about me being a star. We're very clear I'm not a star. I'll also say the only one that ever calls me Dr. Perkins is no one. Everyone calls me Danny. My mother says she has 3 boys, 3 girls, and a Danny. And depending on the day, having a Danny is a blessing or a curse. Hopefully today it will be a blessing. Unfortunately, I have to be honest, unlike Kelly and Ross, who are veterans, I am not. And so I come to this effort with a passion for it, really, that I get from my father, who at age 16, after his father passed suddenly, joined the Army and then spent just 6 years in it. But it's something that I really appreciate his willingness to step up, and that was during the Korean conflict. And so I just want to own that. I'm not a veteran and certainly don't know what it's like to be a person who's worn the uniform, but I have the highest esteem for those folks. And finally, just to say, we talked about this a little while ago. Kelly, Ross, and I would rather this be a great opportunity for conversation and engagement. And so this is not one of those ones where you should hold back on your thoughts or comments or questions. Rather, let's have it be a conversation where we can move forward. And I really appreciate Kelly providing that opportunity at the end to think about what do we do with this in different ways that we haven't thought about. So I really just want to acknowledge them to start with. We'll go to the next slide, if that's okay. What we're going to talk about today is based on the data that we had collected from a 3-year longitudinal study that started really the data collection started in the late summer of 2016. And basically what we did was we went out to the population of veterans that were separating in a 3-month period, which was almost 50,000, it was 48,695. And we asked them and provided a little incentive for them to consider going along a journey with us, to provide us information about how that transition journey was going to go for them. And we had a really great, in fact, much better than we thought we'd get. Almost 10,000 said yes. which we didn't expect, right? And I'll explain why that is a good thing and a bad thing in a few minutes, but just to give you a sense. So that's about 23% response rate. For those who don't know much about surveys, that's a pretty good response rate when you consider veterans. Generally, if you're lucky, you'll get to 10%. So we did really, really well on this. Go to the next slide. Oh. So I just want to take you through this journey. I mentioned TBMI, which is the Vet Metrics Initiative, and really was a partnership, an amazing partnership between 3 different VAs: Boston VA, Western Mass VA, and Central Texas VA, Penn State, myself, and then the fiduciary and the, if you will, the coordinator was the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, which is an operating foundation, which means they don't have really their own money, but they'll get money in and then coordinate the efforts around that. And so really the funding for this came from 13 private foundations, or private funders, I should say, who said, we really want to understand what this transition process looks like. So we actually, we worked on that for, it was as we mentioned, 3-year longitudinal study. And the study ended last summer in the middle of the pandemic in really July of 2020. But we wanted to keep going at Penn State because the funders really had a lot more questions that didn't get answered, and they wanted to get them answered. And we were up for the challenge. And so we created a new enterprise within the clearinghouse, which is right here, the Veteran Network, Veteran Evaluation and Research Applications Network, which really sole purpose is to try to figure out how do we use data and try to answer practical questions folks have. So that's how that came to be. Next slide. So here's the team. I want to take just a minute and acknowledge everyone. I didn't do that at the very first slide, but this is the team of folks that's involved in the effort. Everyone has contributed in unique ways to the effort, and we're having, I'll be honest, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to try to figure out how do we use data in ways that is helpful. And so one of the great things is a lot of our partners push back if they don't think what we're doing is helpful, and that is also a good thing, right? So just acknowledge everybody here on this slide. Next. So I want to take you through the TBMI study and then the new part of the study, which I'll talk briefly about. So TBMI, again, the Vet Metrics Initiative, started in, basically, we really collected data in October, November of 2016. And the veterans we collected data from, that 9,500, almost 600, 9,600 veterans, were either separated the day before they filled out the survey or within 3 months of when they filled out the survey, right? And they were given an incentive, and you can see that. And then we went back every 6 months and asked them a boatload of questions. And I mean, when I said a boatload, 45 minutes. So a 45-minute survey is a long survey, which is why there was an incentive attached to it. We really wanted to make sure we got the information we needed. I know there's stuff popping in the chat, so feel free to jump in if there's something we need to bring up here. And so we just went through that. You'll see at wave 6, which was May of 2019, we were almost 3 years out, right? Some of those individuals were 3 years, some were 33 months, right? So we just, you know, it's that range, if you will. And that's when the TBMI study, we did another year of data analysis, did a final report, which is available. We can certainly get it to you, and it's available online. And the study at that point closed. The data from that study, the original TBMI study, will be available to the public sometime this summer which will be housed at the University of Michigan, although it pains me to say that, at the University of Michigan's data repository, which is a great place. I'm just having a little fun there. And so that'll be available for anyone to start examining as much as they want to, right? That wave 7, which is in quotes because it really isn't wave 7 in a sense, it is, but it isn't. And you probably go, this guy doesn't make any sense at some point, but that's okay too. But really what we did, we went back to our folks and said, we'd like to keep talking to you, keep getting your thoughts on how that transition is going. Are you willing to? And we had about 3,500 say, yeah, we'd like to keep going. And so out of that 3,500, we had 3,180 that completed what we call Wave 7, which was in the middle of the pandemic. It was in November to January, November 2020 to early January 2021. And so that Wave 7 is really unique in the sense of, I'm not aware of any other longitudinal study of veterans that has a data collection period smack dab in the middle of a global pandemic. We're just starting to analyze that data. Maybe at some point we'll come back with, and Kelly will have us back again to talk a little bit about what we see with the COVID experience. And we're really hoping to get some folks to consider a Wave 8 as well. So we can just keep trying to understand what does that transition process look for people over the long haul. So that's,
Danny, we've got our,
go ahead.
I think we've got our first applicable question here from Olivia Burley, asking in terms of, are there plans to study military spouses in future studies as you look at how the transition life cycle, similar to what you did with the Veteran Metrics Initiative?
So I'm really glad, I think you said her name was Olivia?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm really glad Olivia asked that. Olivia, I just be clear, I didn't pay you to ask that question, but you couldn't have given me a nice softball to start with. We would absolutely love to figure out and to work with some funders who want to do for our Wave 8. We want to follow the service members, but we really want to follow their partners and spouses, because quite frankly, we don't have that, and we really should have it. And we should do it sooner rather than later, so we can get their perspective on what that transition process has been like and what are their concerns going forward. So to your point, yeah, it's a big gap. I have to be honest, the original TBMI study was pretty costly, as you can tell by what we were paying individuals. And I mentioned before we did not think we'd have almost 10,000 individuals. So we didn't budget for paying 10,000 individuals $25. So we had to start cutting the number of people that could complete the survey. Although there were more that wanted to, we had to say, no, we're full because we can't keep paying. So to your point, Olivia, we would love to. And if anyone's interested in discussing how that might happen, we would really be interested in that. Looks like another question from Colleen. I can't read the whole question now.
I'm asking about expanding that to include caregivers, who may be spouses, parents, siblings, wounded, ill, and injured service members.
That would be really fascinating. And certainly, again, we'd be up for trying to think through what that looks like. I agree. It would be really interesting to do that. There is a really good caregiver study from, I think it was RAND, I believe, in the last 2-3 years. And I don't have it offhand. Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, so they've done some really good work, and certainly it would be good to build off that. So I agree with you on that.
I think it would also be interesting, right, just to iterate this, to kind of hammer this point home, is that within this 10,000, there are opportunities to perhaps engage the partners and spouses of this group or caregivers of this group, right? So there is an opportunity to really dig into this data, but it's just a question of funding and cost, right? Good research costs a lot of money, right? Because as you can see, each of these participants were paid for their time and participation. And so it is a monumental effort. And that's why we want to be able to celebrate this work and just appreciate the data that we've been able to learn and share with you today. So great questions, though, from the team, the participants already.
Yeah, great question. And Kelly, great point. I mean, the whole idea would be that if we did a Wave 8, we'd be going to their partners and spouses. And that would just be wonderful, because we already have a lot of information on this family to a degree. Obviously, from one perspective, we'd like a second, obviously. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so this slide has a lot of numbers. Okay, we're not going to go through all the numbers. So I don't know if people like numbers, then you're probably really excited. If you don't like them, you might say, oh my God, I'm going to get off the webinar now. Hang tight. It's not going to be long. There's really a couple points you want to look at. So if you look at what we're trying to do on this slide is show you we drew from a population, which is very rare when you have the whole population, right? So we got lucky. I'm not going to go into the detail how we got so lucky, but I could do that at some other point. So we had almost 50,000 folks that we went to and said, we'd love you to participate in this study. And of that 50,000, almost 16%, 15.9 were females, for example, right? Well, when we collected the data, we had 18.2% of females complete that survey. So it's a little bit higher than our than the population. So if you will, it's oversampled females, okay? And then if you go, remember that wave 7 is a smaller group. It's 35, it's still pretty good size, 3,500, right? That's a little bit higher, 19% of females completed, right? So, and this is not uncommon, right? We know that females are a little bit more likely to complete surveys than males. It's just, I don't know why that is, but anyway. So you see there's a little difference. So why is this important? Well, because we knew the actual eligible population, we can weight the data such that if we have some differences, like we have more females completing than males, we can weight the data to take that into account. So it can be weighted all the way back up to women are better citizens. I love it. I'm not going to argue that either. It can be weighted all the way back up to that population. So when we're talking about stuff today, we can talk about the population of transitioning veterans from the last decade, about midway through the last decade, right? So we're really talking about post 9/11 veterans around 2016, 17, right? We can talk about it. We can talk about them as a group. We can't really talk about and should not talk about Vietnam vets or vets in the post-Gulf War necessarily, right? Because we don't have necessarily many of those folks there, and that's not what we were surveying. So that all this slide is to do is to say we're pretty close, lined up with our population, and where we aren't, we made adjustments through appropriate statistical methods. Now, some of you are saying, well, you can lie with statistics, and there is no question you can. We're not going to lie to you today. We promise, okay? The data is what the data is. Okay, next slide. Just a little bit more there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time so that we can share these slides afterwards. Kelly, if folks want to see that, no problem at all. Next slide. Okay, so now you might say, well, what is all this? So the funders of the original TBMI study really asked a difficult question, and I thought it was a great question, obviously. They said, what do we take away? You know, we spent a significant amount of money to find out more about this transition process, and you have collected a boatload of data. What do we take away? So we literally have a report of at Penn State of 23 takeaways that we put together that came out in September of 2020. And we can certainly share that if anyone wants to see it. It's actually on the web, but we can share it. What we love to start our presentations with is, are there any of those takeaways we're mentioning that we're going to sort of address with data today? And that's what this is. Here are 3 takeaways that address the notion of components, which I'll go over in much more detail, right? That really talk about what we've learned from our data. So that first one is, if you use components, and we're going to talk about which kinds of components, you can shorten the length of time it takes for a veteran to find employment. Better yet, and surprising to me, because it wasn't something I had thought much about, you can actually increase the likelihood they start at a higher salary by using those components. So that's really good news, right? Next thing is we find, and you'll see some data on this, you can actually, by using those components, see they impact people who are getting promotions. And we can talk a little bit about that. And then finally, they impact folks who are reporting leaving one job and going to another job for a better opportunity. So really exciting stuff, at least I think so. But I'm a little geeky. In fact, I think the first time Kelly and I were talking, she called me a geek, which I thought was a little bit, a little bit much, but that's okay. Okay, moving on to the next slide.
Dan, we do have a couple that.
Oh, yeah, go right ahead, please. Yeah. Jump in.
First is one submitted through the Q&A by Stacy Dixon, asking, a little bit of background on the longitudinal aspect of the study. what's the span from transition to time in the workforce? Or is it longitudinal just in terms of from transition over a number of years?
Great question. So Kelly, can you go back to that thing that had the 7 waves? That's a great question. I'm glad and really, this is much better than me just continuing to talk. So please do this, right? So actually what we did was it's longitudinal from when they separated, and we followed them for, as I mentioned, 3 years, and then we followed a smaller subset for an additional year, right? So in that time, as you'll see later on, some folks, when they got out, they already had a job lined up, right? But a lot of folks didn't. So we get to see how that transition occurs for different folks, which is really important. And the power of longitudinal is to see what changes occur over time. And so hopefully that answers your question. We're following them from transition onward. Some did have a job before they even got out. They had one lined up. Many did not. Many got a job from wave 1 to wave 2, or from wave 1 to wave 3, and so on and so forth. And we're going to look at that a little bit. I hope that answers that question. Are there more, Ross?
There are. We've got a question from David about, is the data segmented by individual service branch? And if so, do we have any actionable patterns that emerged from that based on service branch?
Fantastic question. The answer is yes and yes. So yes, it is. We can segment it by service branch. And thank you, Kelly. You're jumping ahead. You're jumping backwards. I love this. It's great. You can see the percent of folks we have. Now, remember, our sample size is good enough that those percents mean we have a fair number of folks in each of the service categories, right? I will not be presenting that today. It doesn't mean we don't have it, but Kelly said I had to keep it to less than 5 hours. And so we just had to pick some things out right away. So, but if you're interested in that, we certainly could talk about that at a later point in time. And I appreciate the question.
And it'll be important that you fill out your feedback survey so we can present more material to you, because I love that everyone's so interested. This is really cool stuff. So Thanks for the questions.
And I'll just pepper you with one more on this, and then I'm going to hold a couple other until we get to the deeper data dive at the end. But great question from Tina Salisbury about what's the breakdown of the weighting for females and males compared to each branch's breakdown of gender composition?
That is a fantastic question, and one I cannot answer right now. And in fact, I would have to have my amazing, and you saw her in the picture, Nicole Morgan, who's our statistician, walk you through that, because that's above my pay grade. That is stats charged to the level, but I can assure you we could get you that, and we could talk about the weighting. The weighting was done generally, though. I can tell you how the weighting was done. It was done by looking at both the rank, the gender, and the education. I'm probably missing one, so I apologize. And the education of the individual. So when we weight, we take that into account to weight back up. And I might have butchered that a little bit, so please feel free to slam me again at some point later.
Well, you have, I don't know, someone says in the chat here that they only came to us, that the data weights utilize full cross classification of gender by pay grade by branch from your friends at Straley Associates. So I don't know what that means actually, but we're just going to go with that.
Yeah. And it might have been my colleague that did that. Okay, are we jumping? Are we on that now? Great. Boy, you guys are keeping me jumping here. Okay, so we're going to talk. And I really get fired up about talking about components, because to me, this is one of the most actionable things from the TBMI data set. But I have to be honest, I've not figured out a way to communicate it such that everyone else gets as excited as I do. So I'm really hoping that as we work through this, you guys push me on thinking through how to talk about this and how to think about it differently than maybe we are thinking about it. So let's talk about program components. So we're moving forward. Okay, so before we actually go to this slide, it's fine, leave it up. But just, so why program components? Why not do evaluations of programs? Well, I think you all know how many of programs have popped up in the last 20 years, right, to support veterans, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a little overwhelming thing. And good evaluation costs, as you know, a fair amount. And so what we were trying to do with the TBMI data is, can we look at, instead of actual programs? Can we look at the components that make up the program? And can we see if any of those components are linked to well-being outcomes over time? And so that's what we did. It was a, if you will, it was doing an end around the problem of how expensive evaluation is. So just to go there. Okay. And I see Kimberly, who's one of our team members, is explaining where the weight's coming from. So if you have that question and you want to look in the chat, feel free to do so. So let's talk about common components, right? So I'm not going to go into a big detail. There's a lot of information on how do we come up with this methodology of creating common components, right? But basically, I'm just going to go over what the 4 types of components are, and I'll give you a little backdrop of how we pulled them out, because it's a little tricky. So the first is content, right? Content component. So content component is, well, what was taught, what skills were provided in that service or program. Pretty straightforward. Process is, how was that taught or provided? So often processes rarely stand alone, although there's always exceptions, and there are a few exceptions, which we'll try to go over. A barrier reduction component is one that really creates an opportunity for the individual to engage with the program. It's really what it is, right? And the fourth one is sustainability, and it's sustainability of the, if you will, the learning or the skills. How do we make sure that as people are learning and further developing their skills, they continue to do that, right? What are the little tweaks we know about, right? So those are the big components. Now, before we go to the next slide, what we did was we said, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to have veterans name programs within the well-being domains that we looked at. We had 4 well-being domains, although we broke one of them into 2. So we had 5. We had employment, education, health, which included both mental and physical. We also had financial, legal, and then we had social. So those are our well-being domains. So in each of those domains, we asked people to tell us about programs they were using. Okay. And then we asked them to tell us about some of the things in those programs. A few questions, not a lot, right? So what we did was, anytime a program got named by 3 veterans, okay, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it isn't a lot, we actually went to go find that program. What does that mean, we went to go find that program? Well, we went to the web, and actually most programs have a website, and most programs have an annual report. And so what we did was we digged into it and see if we could pull out what are the components that comprise that program. And then what we did for a few of them is follow up with a call to the program developer or implementer to see how off we were. And we had sort of worked on this for a while, and we did really well. So we really were catching what were the components. Okay. All right, next slide.
Got a great question from Hugo. Yeah. Who's asking, in regards to those programs and the specific, VSOs or other entities, how many different programs did the respondents use, kind of both as a group or on average individually?
So I will tell you this, that's a great question. I should have had that. We have that, so it's not a question. Well, I will show you in terms of the next one. When we look at the program components, we're talking about from 1,000 programs, but actually, I think in wave 1, there was well over, I want to say close to 4,000 programs named. Now that we weren't able to dig into all of them, because remember, you had to be named by 3. Okay, but yeah, and I can get those numbers. So it's a lot, right? And even in wave 6, it drops down, but it's several hundred still being named. So you need to hear that. So I apologize for not the exact numbers. Kimberly may be working on that because she's like a dynamo, and her and Nicole together might throw that in the chat. I have no idea. So before we really get started on components, though, let's talk about what we know about people not using programs. Okay, because as you know, there's a lot of opportunities out there. And so we had asked the veterans, the ones who didn't name programs, why they weren't using programs. Because that's, I think, important information. So we have less than, roughly 38% that are saying I didn't need a program. I'm good. And that's great. That means, they apparently didn't need a program in that wave. And we continue to ask that question, right? And the wave, really, I think we asked this question in wave 1, actually, just to see who's using, because we assumed, and it may be a bad assumption, although I think it's probably not, that folks getting out are going to be really trying to use programs to get themselves up and running, right? So then we see that the next three bullets really speak to the importance of a navigation system, whatever you want to call it, a support system, some way to really help veterans know what's out there and know what they can actually tap, right? Because those next three, 15% weren't sure what they were eligible for. Almost 13% couldn't find a program that met their needs. So that tells me there was a program, but they just couldn't find it. So we need to think through what that looks like. And 11% didn't know how to get help. So those things are amenable to me. We can address that. So we need to be thinking about how do we make sure we connect our veterans to the navigation systems that are out there. Okay, next slide. Okay, are there any questions, Ross, you want to ask before we go to this one?
I've flagged a couple for the deeper data dive, but
Okay.
I think we're okay at this point.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to take a minute and explain this because this can get a little tricky. So this is frequency of employment components by program. So that percentage is not veterans at the top, like that 47% career plan. That's 47% of the employment programs of the 1,162 employment programs we did a deep dive into had the content component of career planning as one of their major thrusts. That makes kind of sense. I don't think anyone should be surprised by that. And you could see that 32% of those employment programs had resume writing, and you can go through that percentage all the way down, right? There's more there, but these are the biggies, right? So just to give you a sense of what was happening there. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we're going to get into that deep dive that Ross is sort of pushing me to move faster on. You know, those Army guys, they don't like to wait too much. So he's on a tear right now. So we know that for a fact, we're going to talk about it, but I just have to give you, and thank God my statistician can't interrupt me because she won't be happy with the description I give, but it's going to be brief, but that's okay. We used a technique called logistic regression, which really allows you to say, what are the chances that a person gets that outcome and related to, and they had this predictor, right? That's really what it's looking at. That's all it is, right? And it determines which groups are more or less likely to experience the outcome. I'm gonna walk you through what that means in reality when we get to the components here. So, and then they have this really great term, odds ratio, which is of a 1 indicates there's equal. So if it's 1, there is nobody has an advantage, right? But you'll see in a minute, if it's greater than 1, then that group has an advantage. And we're going to talk through that pretty easily. So just bear with me. The other thing we did, and I think it's important, is what's called a match propensity analysis. And what that means is we took someone like Ross, when he got out at age 32, I'm making this up, by the way, I have no idea when he got out, but he got out at age 32. He was a major, I don't know, or colonel, whatever he was. I don't know. What was it?
Pretty good on this, Danny.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So
he got out and he immediately used an employment program that had component A. Well, we matched Ross, who is a white male in the Army, major. We matched him with a white male in the Army from our data set, major, who didn't have that employment program component, to see if having it mattered or not. Now you may say, well, that doesn't sound that impressive. Well, it really is impressive. And I'm not patting myself on my back, believe it or not. I didn't have very little to do with it. It's the team that really has the most to do with it. But what it means is we're able to really compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, which is really rare because it's really hard to have a good comparison group. But because of the size of this longitudinal data, we could do that. Okay, next slide. Okay, now there's a lot here. We're going to go over this. And Kelly, I need you to tell me when I'm running out of time, because I do not pay attention to that. So you need to just feel comfortable with that.
Thank you. We got 20 minutes to the top of the hour and then 30 minutes more for those that want to stay.
Okay, but we want to leave at least a good 10 minutes for questions. So we probably won't get through all the slides, but once you understand this first slide, you can understand the rest of them. I promise. Okay. So Ross, cut me off and where there's 10 minutes left for good questions, or anytime now we can start. All right. But let me get through this one because I think this might hopefully answer some questions. Okay. So first thing to see here is what we're talking about are folks who did not have a job in wave one. So, okay. And and somebody's going to, because this is an incredibly engaging group, very smart, they're going to say, how many people is that? Rightfully so. I'm going to say it's around 1,500, give or take. Okay. So about 1,500 of our veterans who did not have it, maybe a little bit larger than that. 1,500 of our veterans who did not have a job and were looking for work. Because there's a group of our veterans that didn't have a job but weren't looking for work. But we're not going to count them if we're trying to see whether they get employment the next wave or two, right? Because that doesn't make a lot of sense to count them, right? So what do we do? Well, here's how this works, right? So let's take this first one, interviewing, comma, mentor coach. Remember when we talked about components at the beginning, the first thing, interviewing, that's the content. So the content is how do you interview? Right. And so I should have definitely done that class because I think it was like 12 interviews before I actually had my first job. But but that's beside the point. But you're going to the employment program, getting some help with interviewing. And the way you're getting the help, the way it's being delivered is through a mentor coach. So I think Ross talked about Hire Heroes puts you with one-on-one with someone. That's similar. Yeah, that's that notion of a mentor coach kind of thing, right? So what we see is those folks who didn't have a job in wave one and got a job in wave two, that component didn't seem to make a big difference. So, okay, you can be kind of bummed, but actually go to the next wave, wave three. Now what's wave three mean? Because you can say, well, what is wave? I can't remember what wave is. Okay, so wave three is, right, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, 18 months out, roughly 15 to 18 months out, okay? So that's what we're talking about. They've been transitioned out somewhere between 50, and by wave three, they got a job. And what do we see here? We see that if you participated in a program that had the content, the component of interviewing with a mentor coach, you were almost 3 times, but 2.7 times more likely to have a job than someone who was looking for a job that did not participate in that component. And that is huge. So that tells me that I need to be thinking about the folks I'm trying to help, and I need to be thinking about what kind of components am I offering, right? We can go down to the next one and actually resume writing mentor coach. We see now that doesn't mean, and I should say this, right? These are the ones that had the most impact. So we could look at resume writing and then delivered online content. It actually did have an impact. You were 30% more likely to get a job, right, in wave 2. And don't quote me, it's something like that, right? But we went with one of the big ones, right? And that's a huge one. You link it with a mentor coach, resume writing in wave 2. So you didn't have a job in wave 1, but you get a job in wave 2. You're 91% more likely to have a job by wave 2 if you participated in a program that offered resume writing mentor coach. And you could see how that works throughout. I'm going to stop here and see if there are there questions that folks have.
There's a few. What about overlapping components? So question from Hugo about if someone used a career planning support component that had resume writing or interviewing as a subcomponent within that.
Right, that's a great question. So we looked at each one of these separate, and we have not done a cumulative look yet. That's on the agenda, but it's a little bit more tricky than it sounds from an analytical standpoint, but it is on the agenda. We really haven't gotten to it yet. So we're looking at these separate. Great question.
And from Tina, did you study how many in wave 1 that did not have a job compared to how much terminal leave they had at separation? So, what was their motivating factor for how quickly they needed to find a job?
Wow, I love Tina. She really is. She's pitching some fastballs here. So no, we don't have that information, but what we do have, and that's the, Tina, I think you asked the question about longitudinal early, but we do have is we look at people who get jobs, as you see below, from wave, they were taking stuff in wave 2 and got jobs in waves 3 and 4, so even further out. So hopefully some of that is getting captured there, but to your point, that is unfortunately probably a gap we can't fix in our data.
I've got a question from Eddie as well. You know, as we look at kind of the gap for transitioning service members, what would you say were the most actionable strategies or components that, you know, individuals should look at informing current strategy towards veterans employment and quality of life efforts?
Wow, okay, that's a really, I'm going to break that question apart just a little bit. And I'm going to ask Kelly, because I know we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to ask her to go down towards the end, and then I'm going to answer that question. Oh, we have a poll. Actually, go up there. How about this? Go back up. No, go back all the way up to where we were. Sorry. So I don't know who asked that question. I think it was Eddie. Can we just ask Eddie to hold on? And I promise by the next slide, we will get to that question. Okay.
Sure.
Any other question?
Yes. Any sharing of the data with DoD or DoD transition programs? Have they been involved in the outbriefs and summary reports?
We have had it, myself, and I'm certain my VA colleagues have had opportunities to share a little bit with the DoD. I'll just say it that way. We haven't had an official partnership with the DoD, and just calling all things out, the DoD did not provide any funding for the TBMI study. So just
and two more quick ones. Did you break out VA vocational rehab programs from non-governmental programs as you looked at those components? And that's from Mitch.
Right. So Mitch, we did not yet, but we can, because we have that information. I would venture to guess our cell size will get kind of tiny. That is, the number of folks will be a little bit smaller, but still probably with the size of our sample, we can do that for sure. And then
I've got a few others that kind of for the 30-minute follow-on. So if you haven't heard your question and you're wondering, I flagged them for follow-up in the 30-minute. But a great one on, has the DoD skill bridge programs been taken into account in terms of analyzing those as components for the transition?
I'm going to try to answer the question, and if I don't, I'll apologize. What we did know is whether or not they participated in TAP. I do not know that we know that they, in fact, I know we don't know whether they participated in the DoD skill bridging. And I'm not clear, was the DoD skill bridging program there in 2016?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So let's just be clear on that. Now, one last thing before we move to the next slide, a networking conference you'll see is under wave 2. And you'll see, well, what is that? You might say, well, that is actually just a process component. So it's not really, the content is getting folks together to really meet other folks and have the opportunity to find out what's out there, other employment folks, if you will, and find out what's out there. And that plays a role in who's finding jobs. And I think it gets to some of what Tina talked about just a little while ago about motivation. So, all right, let's jump to the poll, because we've got to at least do one of these polls. You work so hard to put it up there, Kelly.
It's fine. Well, okay, so we're going to launch a poll here. We want to know which content components do you use in your veterans programming? So we'll just give you guys a minute or two. Put your
this isn't fun if you don't answer it. So
yeah, put your screens away. It's time to engage for a minute. Multitasking has to end. I love it.
I don't know. We have at least a minute. We promised you a full minute, but you got to be moving now. Don't be close the email down.
We've got Danny coming at the top of the hour. So yeah, 10 minutes we have here.
Okay, got it. That's why we're moving here. Whenever you think you should present the data, please do.
I've got 45 seconds. Is it okay if I teach y'all 15?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end the poll.
Let's see what we got. Okay, so interesting with our group here. I don't know why career planning and exploration is, oh, maybe it's red because it's the highest. Is that what the red means?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. But yeah, folks are pretty involved in different things that we know really matter, right? And hopefully you can then link it to the process part that isn't linked here, right? So you want to look at that process, how you're actually engaging your participants. Great, I love it. Okay, next slide here. Okay, this is real quick. The neat thing about having a large enough data set is you can understand, which components matter for whom. I'm going to skip to that second bullet. However, when examining only Black non-Hispanic veterans, they were 3 times more likely to find a job if they used a mentor coach with interviewing content. So we know if your target audience is Black non-Hispanic veterans, you should really think about not only interviewing, but interviewing with a mentor coach. That's really important. And you can see the other things there that we can begin to dissect the components and who they're powerful for across the board. Next slide. I'm going to jump us along just because I know time is not our friend. Okay, now I want to take a moment just because this is something we had not, at least I hadn't, to anticipate it that you would see components predicting who was getting promoted over time. So these were individuals that reported, getting promoted over the period of time. So they had a job and got promoted. And we see that components can play a role in how quickly individuals get promoted. Again, remember the comparison group is individuals that look a lot like, we used Ross, somebody that looked like Ross, but didn't participate in that component. And so what we're seeing is, for example, if we just looked here, job certification, maybe it's not that surprising, but it's just good to know it actually matters, right? By wave 4, those folks who were participating in that in wave 2 were 50% more likely to have gotten promoted. So doing that component seemed to make a difference. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Keep going. Okay, now this one I love because we asked folks, did you leave your job for a better opportunity? Now, Tina's probably going to ask me, what was the better opportunity? And Tina, I can't answer that. What I can tell you, though, is that the individual filling it out believed they left the previous job to the new job, and it was a better opportunity, which I think is really important because we know that perception is very important and in many ways not totally reality, but it does color our understanding of reality, right? Okay. I'm not picking on you, Tina. I just love that you asked really difficult questions. So please don't hear that as a negative at all. So we can pick any one of these. We'll just pick translating military to civilian work with a mentor. So I think that's an important point here. You can see direct instruction below too, but with a mentor who's helping you translate, right? From wave 1 to wave 3, you talk about leaving that first job and getting a new job, and you're 67% more likely to get a better opportunity. Okay, so if there's no takeaway here, then that makes me sad, but I think there are lots of takeaways for you all to think about how well are you aligning to these components. And then the other takeaway, or maybe the homework assignment, is what do we need to do to help explain this better and figure out how to use this information? Because I think that's really important. Next slide. I think we're almost.
We have 5 minutes and a comment here from David, and we will get into more of this data, but I have a couple of things. One, I'm going to put the survey in the chat for everybody to see,
right?
In case you do have to leave. If you have more questions and ideas and comments, please put this in the survey and we will put this together for you. So just wanted to share that. But David is asking if it would be fair to say that the first job post-service is a true learning experience and informs what a person would want to do in another opportunity. We know that there's high turnover after that first job, but is it fair to generalize it that broadly?
I think it's fair to say that for the majority of veterans, they do transition to a second job relatively quickly within the first year or so after getting the first job. So we don't know exactly why they transition, but we certainly do know for the majority. And we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to make you take me all the way to slide 22. We're going to skip the poll. I would love to talk about the poll, but we can't. Oh, now you've gone too far.
Too far?
Yeah, one more back, one more. There you go. So this is another way to think about the components. There's a lot going on here, and I it really is Kelly and Ross's fault, because they could have told me to have fewer slides, but they didn't tell me that. So that's their fault, right? So we just blame them. But another way to think about the components is how many the components impact on various outcomes. So we just take career planning, exploration, interactive online. So really I shouldn't say that, really online opportunities for people to really do their career planning and explore careers, right? We see that, in fact, across all employment outcomes, and you saw 3 of them, right? Getting a job, getting a promotion, leaving for a better opportunity, right? That component, career planning exploration, delivered through interaction online, and it has to be interaction, so not passive, shows up 12 times. So what does that mean? Well, that seems to be a useful tool in the toolkit we might want to use. And so this is another way to think about the components. How often do they appear as being useful? Okay. So I'm going to stop there. I think the last slide is just how to get a hold of us, or something like that.
Well, look.
Yep. Feel free to jump to our website to get more information, but I'll stop there.
And somebody was asking for connections from members of the team. So for everybody, we'll make sure we share all the slides, the data, the recording, and you are welcome to continue in with us for another 30 minutes, but we understand that everyone has different demands on their day. I'll just highlight a couple of things. So again, here's the survey. This is a little QR code. We've all been to virtual menus. You guys can just take a little photo of that and access the survey right there if you want it. Plus it's also in the chat. I'll put that in later for the rest of the team, but we do have a couple things coming up at the Institute on the 20th. We'd love to invite you to join us for our Asian American Pacific Islander month discussion. We'll be talking about how VRGs and ERGs have flexed in light of the recent anti-Asian bias and what that means for DEI in their organizations. And that includes all of you. And then of course, our partners at the Fundraising Academy have a webinar coming up about donor conversations, always some good stuff. And just one highlight thing too, Combined Arms is doing Snacks and Vax on May 22nd. We're doing a food drive, vaccination clinic, and we have some snacks donated from some local organizations. So for any of you in the Houston area, we really invite all of you to come and join us for that. And more to come. Any ideas that you guys need, please dig into those surveys, and we love that feedback, and just let us know how we can better support you. So thank you for those that have to depart for joining us today. And for the rest of you, we will go back to our regularly scheduled programming. So more of Danny and his entertainment. We're so grateful to you. Do we want to jump back, or Ross, do we have some questions that can help me?
Yeah, we've gotten quite a few. And so I think, I'm going to try and frame them up in a semi-logical order for you, Danny. There's a couple that are a bit sort of overarching. A few asking, is there access to the survey that was used to gather the data on the study participants?
Yeah, so actually there is the wave 1, well, actually the well-being inventory has been published and is available. And if you go to the Veteran Network website, we have that citation available. And then for the complete survey, that is also available via the TBMI website. But we can also get that to you. That's not a problem for wave 1. But do know that each wave there were, just to be clear, each wave there were slight changes. We dropped some things and added, some things stayed the same, obviously, but some things changed over time, obviously.
Absolutely. And then as far as where could someone go to access sort of a written executive summary or summary of the key findings?
Right. So if you go to that veterannetwork.psu.edu, that is available on that website.
Okay, wonderful. So kind of bringing us back to the recruiting methodology, we have a question on, can you elaborate on the recruitment methodology? Did you collaborate with TAP program, military installations? How did you recruit these transitioning vets?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we do have a paper on that, but I can summarize it really easily, right? The really cool part about this, well, there's lots cool about it, but TBMI, I had never been in a collaborative project with, I mean, think about it, 3 other principal investigators from 3 different VAs, me from Penn State, and then our colleagues from Henry M. Jackson Foundation. And the way it worked, and I'll be as brief as possible, but I want to give you enough detail so you get it, right? The VA has that VADER system, which as people transition out, the VA gets their record. And so they know who's transitioning out, right? So what we did was send an intro letter that went to everyone that was transitioning out, for that 3-month period. And it was from the VA, and it says, in the next week, you're going to get a letter not from the VA, but from a study that is not a VA study. So it's much broader than a VA study. Nothing wrong with a VA study, but okay. We would, if you're interested, please follow up with that. And so then they got a letter from us, if you will, with a crisp, very crisp $5 bill. Believe it or not. And and then what we ended up having is almost 9,600, 9,599 folks say, oh, okay. And they they typed in the link, and they went and they signed up and completed the survey, and then got $20. And then we did a few things along the way, which was we did a little we sent out a magnet between one wave, and we sent out something like a paper clip thing between, so little trinkets just to remind them we really were valuing their information, because it was helping us think through what are we pulling out there. So that was really critical. And then each wave, if you remember that, and you'll have the slide deck for each wave, that amount they got. So the first wave they got 25. The second wave, they got 30, and so on and so forth until they hit 50. And then we've kept wave 6 and 7 were at 50. And I don't think we'll go up, because it's really pricey, obviously, when you do the math there.
I had a question as well on the.
Are you trumping other people? Is that really appropriate for you to?
No. I just was floored with the 23% response rate on the initial recruiting effort. Is awesome. And
too.
I was just curious if you had, what aspects do you think contributed to that? Was there specific language? Do you think that having that endorsement letter from the VA that preceded your recruiting letter, what factors of it do you think really helped with that high response rate?
I wish I could tell you exactly. I think it was sort of the approach made it clear that if you participated, your information was going to be kept confidential and not linked to something else, right? So that was important, I think, for individuals. But also, I think I'll be honest, putting the crisp $5 bill in made it clear we were making a commitment. We really valued your information, and we'd like you to just stop and read the letter, because nowadays I'm not sure anyone opens their mail, but we would like you to stop and read the letter. And I think that was a good faith effort, and I think it was rewarded in some ways. And then I would say the continuation, because we actually had to keep shutting it off about a week early from when we planned to shut it off, every wave after wave 1, because people were jumping on it. And I think it was also they got their Amazon gift card within 48 hours of completing the survey. So sort of a quick win there.
Yeah.
And I'll just say the last wave we just did, because it was fun to do it. We were all worried about doing it. We did it right. We did it November, December, and 4 days into January. And most, the old school would say never ever do a survey over the holidays, right? Well, actually, I think people loved getting the $50 gift coupon for, for the holiday. So it worked out really, really well. And again, we had to shut that down because we couldn't go much higher. So
that's super helpful, I think, especially as we try to understand how across the VSO space, how our clients are doing, what are ways that we can learn more effective strategies for that.
yeah.
Hugo had a question earlier as you were talking about that in wave or preceding wave one, and those veterans who were not employed and said that they did not need any help in finding employment efforts. Was there any follow-up study with them, maybe them changing and saying that they did need help, any ability in future waves to tease out aspects of them using programs or support functions, even though they might have entered initially that they didn't need help?
Actually, Hugo, it's you should be a research scientist. That's a great question we can actually answer now, right? Because we have every wave, we have whether they participated in programs, right? So we could take that group that said, they didn't need help, or we could take the group that said they weren't sure whether they were eligible or not. And we can actually look and see if they actually, the next wave or the wave after that, did they jump on something? So there is some movement. Now, of course, your sample size will probably get a little smaller, but with the size of our sample, it would still be worth looking at. So that's a great idea. So believe it or not, I do have a spy on this webinar who's taking notes, because you guys are usually the best scientists. The rest of us at the university, we're just not keeping up with you people, I think, for that.
Got a great question from Philip. As you looked at the programs and engagements that the veterans used, did they answer any questions about the total time of or quality of service that they received? So he asked a specific one, if they were partnered with a mentor, did they get 2 hours of mentoring support, or was there any amount of that detail?
So the short answer is no, and that's the challenge, right? And I'm not making a scapegoat. The reality is, by doing the components, we were able to really look across a lot of different programs, which I think is helpful because there's just not enough money to do a rigorous evaluation of every program. But also because of the survey length already, we couldn't go into that kind of level of detail. So we could look, and for example, some of the annual reports actually mentioned how long folks participated, but we didn't actually put that into our analyses because it wasn't enough of the reports the annual reports we were looking at. So great question. And that's where I think the disadvantage of it is, of course, is that you could only go so far. And unless you're doing a full-blown evaluation, you lose some of that detail.
A question on as far as observations regarding those who left for a better opportunity or the job-to-job transition. How many of those respondents were transitioning from job to job in the civilian world? And then was there any observation of what prompted that? Was it a different type of job, an entirely new opportunity? And sorry, Hugo, if I'm misinterpreting the question.
No, that's a great question. Between Hugo and Tina, I could just, we could just go on and on here. But I think the short answer is we haven't looked at that. We can look at it to some degree. I don't know that we'll get as specific as Hugo wants. I'm not sure anyone could ever get that specific. Sounds like Hugo's got pretty high demands in a good way. But I do believe we could look at why individuals, what might be some reasons they changed. I will tell you, though, in this sample, our junior enlisted folks, so the folks that got out when they were junior enlisted, those folks that had a job in wave one, about 60% of them had a different job. They didn't necessarily say it was a better job, but had a different job by wave two. So that tells me at least one possible explanation is, I think it might have been Tina, or maybe it is, maybe I'm just focused on her. Someone else said that, maybe people got out, took the first job they could get because you need a job. You need to have money coming in. I think we've all been there in some way, shape, or form. And then they realize, oh, this isn't really what I want to spend my time doing. And they move. So we do see some of that for sure. And we can look at that a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to jump in here. I know there's all these questions about Steph Drake had put some in the chat, and it was exactly that question, which was Most of the transitioning service members are, 22 to 26-year-olds, and so that may affect their behavior. So it sounded like, Danny, you said about 60% of the junior enlisted were the ones that left their careers. Like, do we have any data on some of the older or the senior enlisted and the officers that serve longer periods of time as it relates to job skipping?
Absolutely, we absolutely do, and actually I have a slide on that. My old brain can't keep all the numbers in, so it's pretty high though. I mean, it's not nearly as high as 60. I want to think it's around 20 something, but certainly being old, I'm not going to put too much of my money on it. Let's put it that way. But it's definitely, I think it's close to 20 something.
Yeah, because there was a lot of conversation in the chat about, in some ways it's not great if you are hiring a first time, like the data is not great if you're hiring a first time transitioning veteran. And how do we use this information to improve transition services and everything else to increase first job retention, right? I think that's something we as a community need to reflect on as well. So I know there were some other questions about the tracking of any types of jobs. Do you have data on, like, did they go private industry, federal careers, state?
We actually do have data on that, and we haven't done much on the analysis of that. We keep getting bombarded by people like Ross and Kelly, and they don't let us go and go into our lab and just run analysis all day. So, but no, we do have that, and we will continue to examine that stuff over time. We also have actually and we haven't even looked at this yet, on the program side, we have the kinds of programs, right? Whether they're government programs or private or nonprofit and things like that. So we have to look at that too. There's so much to look at.
Yeah, so tell us, who's the best service provider for transitioning? No, I'm just kidding.
I can't answer that because I swore an oath that we would only talk about components and not programs.
I know, but we all want to know the answer to that question.
There's as many opinions on that as there are VSOs, Kelly.
That's right. I'm going to reiterate the point of how veterans are having trouble navigating that sea of goodwill out there, and just maybe reasons why we're all in business. So
yeah, and I think we're figuring out. I think there was a question earlier about. I think actually, Ross, one of your questions was around, did we work with TAP, and when you were asking about how we found the sample, we did. But I think one of the takeaways we mentioned, and I'm hoping it doesn't get me in trouble, but if it does, so be it, I guess. But one of the takeaways we mentioned is we've got to come up with a better warm handle, right? I mean, so as folks are transitioning out, why can't we link them to navigation systems? Because it seems to me there are several that are doing, I think, pretty good work. And we need to be thinking about how that happens, right? Because I don't think we figured it out. And again, it's not easy, so there's no blaming going on, and we always need to be trying to improve. So, but it's figuring out, well, what should that look like?
We've all learned a lot in this navigation, and every mistake that we make, it helps us to improve it for the future, for sure. So there's a couple more questions in here about, are we able to measure retention as remaining within the industry or same company in terms of, some of that, we talked about the different waves and hopping to different jobs, but for those that stayed, do we have data that shows their retention rates? Yeah,
we haven't looked at it, but we certainly have. So what we ask them every single wave, we ask them about changes in their life, right? So we asked, of course, employment changes. We ask personal and social relationship changes. We even ask if they move. So we have some stuff on moving as well. And so we could certainly come back at some point and provide some of that information. We do have that, right? And we could even look at that, and I think that's what the person might have said. And so I'm not stealing their idea, but I'm going to just note it. You could look at, was it a private? What type of industry was it? We have a little bit about, but at a broad level, types of industry. So are there certain industries that folks are, once they're in, they're sticking in, at least for those first 3 years and through COVID. Just a little whet the appetite on COVID. We find that about 70% of our veterans that responded to that wave 7 kept their job during the COVID crisis. So 71% actually. which is pretty good. And there's a lot more details there. I'm sure you're going to all ask like 15 questions on it. And that's all I can remember. So remember, I'm not as young as I used to be, and the brain just can't keep all those numbers.
I think there's more questions coming in. It's amazing how people want to know, do we have data on like hourly versus salary jobs and how this changed over time? And I think, I'd like to reiterate to our participants, there is a lot of this data. And if we're interested in this, we could do some, smaller breakout groups or follow-up sessions if we're interested, to give Danny a chance to maybe ask one of his teammates to present the data for us instead. But just does that data exists? Is that possible to see that information?
Are you asking me? Certainly.
Yeah, sorry, hourly versus in terms of some of the different waves. I'm sure there's data, right? That.
Oh, absolutely. We have the kind of amount of time being spent in employment. We even have some reasons why people are not seeking employment, right? We also just did, for some of our colleagues, we just did an interesting look at, we labeled it persistent unemployment. So they were unemployed for 4 of the 6 waves. And we also had persistent financial problems. So those individuals that report like not being able to pay their bills, being chased down by a creditor, potentially foreclosing their home. There's a group of those folks that are looking at 4 or more waves of financial problems. So again, we won't be able to answer every single question, but we'll probably have an answer related to the question you're wanting, if not the exact question.
There's a good question in the Q&A from Stacy Dixon about regarding the study rates for the Black and Hispanic participants for their job attainment using the mentor approach. Is there any interest in doing future or further studies, comparing them to non-Black and Hispanics, as well as kind of looking across that life cycle of the promotion or job-to-job transfer? How did that look? You talked about the apples to apples previously, but maybe doing kind of a segmented look comparing by race or other demographic considerations.
Yeah, we've done some of that. We haven't done as much as we'd like to do yet, but we can do that to a degree. I will tell you where we struggle is then when we break our sample into both ethnicity and gender. It becomes difficult for some of our minority groups and females just because of the number, right? But especially when you start talking about senior enlisted or warrant officers, because there's so few to start with, right? So when you start then breaking it apart, but we could do a lot of that. We would just have to leave out a few categories, such as a warrant officers. There's just not enough warrant officers in our database. And again, there's not a lot of warrant officers to begin with. So we certainly could do that. Yeah.
A great question from Jim about any other interesting trends, good or bad, based on gender, race, or other demographics like rank regarding their employment outcomes.
Yeah, there are, and I'm not going to be coy, but I'm going to basically, it's as you might expect. That is, folks that are Black, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, and other minorities struggle more in many of the well-being domains. One thing that strikes me really hard, and I just have that number in my head pretty well, is, for example, the Veterans Home Loan programs. The folks that are not white, non-Hispanic are struggling to use that as much as their white peers, if you will, in a very major way. And that's just an example. And we see that again. We see that in a lot of other areas as well. So I think that does exist, and we've done some analysis and have some slides on that as well.
Well, and I'll just share, and correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, because I will say, right, that what's interesting about this is that we have now the data to reiterate and back up what we already know. So it's confirmed as fact that minority communities struggle to navigate the systems and access the benefits that are available to them. And so I think this is where we as a community have to really do a lot of work and self-reflection and engagement with our minority peers to say, how do we fix this? Right? Because we do have to fix this. And this is really on all of us to do some of that hard work and reflection. But as a highlight, and correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, you shared that like Black women took longer to find an employment opportunity, but did, once they found their job opportunity, they earned an average higher salary than their Black female peers. Is that correct? Would that be right? I remember reading.
I think there's a caveat you're missing, and I can't remember what it is. I apologize. So I'm going to say I'm not absolutely certain.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
you might be lying, and we'll catch you on that. No, but I just am not certain. We do know that, for example, we do know, and I just want to, because we just did this analysis, and it's something people, the narrative for veterans is, of course, I think one of the narratives, and I think it's inaccurate, right, is that veterans are broken, right? When it's not actually the case. Most veterans do very well. We see that already in our data set. The other thing we see in our data set that really is important is veterans are much more likely to be educated than their civilian counterparts. So for example, veterans coming out of the military, even in your enlisted grades, are much more likely than compared to, because we just compared it to a civilian population, 2016 civilian population, and the difference was astonishing. So I do want to say, being in the military has some great opportunities for individuals as well. And that is one of them. Education seems to be playing out in favor of participating in the military. And then when they get out, we do see, for example, to your point, Kelly, we do see that Black females are much more likely to make use of that educational benefit right away. So you could, we don't know for sure, but it's reasonable to assume they went into the military to be able to get that educational benefit, because as soon as they come out, they're jumping into that at a much higher rate.
Well, and I think that's what's really important and interesting about all this data is that we know, right, we have information that shows what's working in terms of the employment components and what those are leading indicators to success, but also how some of those other factors and trajectories do impact financial and legal issues, wellness, and we do have, there's more information and data on those categories as well. What the other components that you'd mentioned earlier is housing, and we know that it's all intertwined. One thing does relate to each other, and why that economic stability and access to education is a key launch pad for all of this entire community. So. Did we get through all of our questions in the Q&A? I know you were watching that, Ross.
There's a couple. Tina actually asked one related just to that comment, Kelly, is, of those who had unemployment or financial problems, were there questions about what other services outside of the employment sector that they were using? And then did those other holistic type services have any impact in future waves on their job search outcomes?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. There were questions about what kind of other programs and services were they using, and if they were available to them. And then the short answer is yes. If they use them, they played a role in their success. Well, we haven't looked at that in the level of detail we need to. There's also a question from Mitch here about unemployment stress, and do you track mental health and addiction issues over time? The answer is yes, we do. And in fact, remember the 5 domains. One of them is health, mental and physical health, and we certainly are tracking that over time, and actually tracking what program components are being used in those areas, and whether or not they relate to positive outcomes over the long haul.
Oh, We want some of that data.
And then there's a question from David. I'd offer that some of the disparity is tied to location. You know, I think David, I think you're absolutely right that some of the disparity is tied to location, family situation, and other variables that affect each person differently. And I think actually some of the neat part of this data is starting to dig into the geographic location of individuals. On another project, we're taking this data and trying to actually put it on a map and then put where are the VA services on that map. And how does that play out for people's various well-beings? As an example, I'm not blaming the VA. I'm just saying it's really cool to start understanding where are people located and where are those different services available. One thing we don't have, I think, on a national level, unless you all can tell me we have it, which would be fantastic, is a national sort of database of VSOs at the mom and pop level, right? So we know where they're at when we get to in Wyoming, and we're not in a large city, although there's none in Wyoming, but when we're not in a city in Wyoming, example, is there a mom and pop veteran VSO that we're not even aware of, right? I don't think there's a database that has that listed. And if there is, I'd love to see it.
Well, there's the National Resource Directory, which is run by the DoD. And then of course there's Patriot Link. And then, of course, there's many community bridges and partners that are resource mapping from the community level at the ground up, much like the Combined Arms Model, America's Warrior Partnership, among others. And so there's many different bridges. But I think, as Hugo said in this comment, is that we're really trying to think through how do we create bridges to the community, knowing that resource navigation is a challenge. How do we improve access or build upon this warm handoff from TAP class to this transition back to the community? And this is the big answer, right? Many of us are involved in this conversation, and knowing that this is suicide prevention in and of itself is just this wraparound holistic services. And I will just say, look, the comments, you guys have been so much fun to host today, and thank you for your engaging and all of these great questions and comments. It's been really fun. And Danny, you've been fantastic sharing this data. Thank you so much for your knowledge, and special shout out to Kimberly, who's been supporting you in the chat with lots of good more research and data, and the entire Penn State team. As you all know, this data is available in executive summaries through the veteran network on the Penn State web pages, and we'll make sure we send all the links and information out to all of you. And like I said, just one more shout out to our survey. Is this where you guys want to dig into additional working groups? Like, let us know. We are here to engage and further this conversation. And also special thanks to Ross for being my partner in crime today. Hire Heroes USA for the great work as always. So we appreciate everyone's time, and just special thanks. Thanks for joining us. Really grateful to all of you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kelly, for the opportunity to join in. And thanks, Danny, for taking us through the study, answering the questions, and putting up with my Army timekeeping model.
Oh, it's great. Thank you guys for being patient with me. Sometimes I go off the rails, so I appreciate it.